Hello, welcome to American Christian or Christian American once again. If you please hit that subscribe button so you get my videos more quickly, and also hit that like button if you like the video so others will be able to get exposure to the videos quickly. Today we're going to be talking about sharecropping. And some of you probably know what sharecropping was, others don't. And I want to compare sharecropping in its history to what there is a present day presence of the same kind of ideas. As we've been talking about in many different videos, at least in different degrees, racism in this country, or oppression, dehumanization, have changed. Every time there was a fight back against one particular mode of oppression, a new one is created. A new avenue of oppression is created. That's why vigilance is very important in this country, to continue to push it down and push it back. Because the people who want to oppress and who seek power and white supremacy and whatever other kind of power are relentless. The only way that we can truly reduce this effect and this power is if we learn that we have to stand together and we can't give up. They don't give up, so we have to continuously push back. And if we were to do that on a regular basis, we wouldn't necessarily have to fight so hard every so often. The reason we fight so hard every so often is that we are negligent as a society on dealing with these things on a daily basis. And we consider it to be somebody else's problem or just too much. Well, it becomes more and multiplies and becomes more and more. And because we have been conditioned and indoctrinated, we don't recognize many of the signs of what's going on until much later, until we're willing to listen to somebody who did recognize these things. But in the meantime, many of us, too many of us, are simply ignoring those things because we don't want to make too much of an effort. But we pay for it later on. And in particular, those who are non-whites pay for it even more. But not just non-whites. Whites that are poor and other things are in the same boat. Maybe not exactly the same degrees, but we are also targeted along the side. Why the target may be definitely African Americans, definitely Native Americans and Latinos and others, or anybody who is non-white. Whites also face the oppression too. Not because they're the main target, but because they're simply in the way, so to speak. Powerful groups of people don't care who they hurt as long as they maintain their power and control. So I've got two videos here that I'm going to show you. One, I'm reading some documents about sharecropping. Another one talks about 40 acres and a mule. One little correction of what I say in the document. It said that 40 acres and a mule was granted by President Lincoln. It wasn't, but it was under his administration where it was administrated, and then later on came the rescindants after he was executed or assassinated. So I'm going to play the video of 40 acres and a mule, and then I'll play the part that I read through documentation, and we'll come back and we'll discuss it.
Here is the truth about 40 acres and a mule. After the Civil War, the U.S. government promised formerly enslaved African Americans 40 acres and a mule to help them rebuild their lives. This promise came from Special Field Order No. 15, issued in 1865 by Union General William T. Sherman. It set aside 400,000 acres of confiscated Confederate land for black families. But after President Abraham Lincoln's assassination, his successor, Andrew Johnson, reversed the order. Most of the land was returned to former Confederate owners, leaving black families with nothing.
Well, here we're discussing sharecropping. Slavery rerouted. Though slavery was abolished in 1865, sharecropping would keep most black Southerners impoverished and immobile for decades to come. The white folk had all the courts, all the guns, and all the hounds, all the railroads, all the telegraph wires, all the newspapers, all the money, nearly all the land, and we had only our ignorance, our poverty and our empty hands. An anonymous sharecropper, Elbert County, Georgia, 1900. On January 1st, 1867, in Marshall County, Mississippi, Cooper Hughes and Charles Roberts entered into an agreement in their contract with the landowner I.G. Bailey. Hughes and Roberts, both formerly enslaved men, agreed to work 40 acres of corn and 20 acres of cotton on Bailey's land, along with all the other work necessary to be done to keep the farm in good order. For the duration of 1967, in exchange for their labor, Hughes, Roberts, and their families would be furnished with stipends of meat, a mule for planting, a plot of land to grow a garden, separate cabins, one third and one half of all the corn and the cotton crops, respectively. On that first day in 1867, Hughes and Roberts joined a growing number of newly freed African Americans turning towards a new agricultural arrangement in the South. It would become to be called sharecropping. In the decades that followed, sharecropping would grow into what scholar Wesley Allen Riddle called the predominant capital labor agreement in the region, defining how hundreds of thousands of black Southerners made a living and supported their families. But once up and running, sharecropping itself would deny the former enslaved their rights and their liberties as free American citizens for nearly 100 years. What is sharecropping? Sharecropping is a system by which the tenant farmer agrees to work an owner's land in exchange for living accommodations and a share of the profits for the sale of the crop at the end of the harvest. The system emerged after the Civil War when the Southern economy lay in ruins with the Confederate monetary system wiped out. Farm and land decimated, slavery abolished under the 13th Amendment, access to labor and capital was extremely limited among the Southern landowners. For former slaves, federal possibilities of residual land fell apart in the 1860s, leaving millions without the promises of full citizenship guaranteed to them by the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments. Take a break here. This is where they were guaranteed, under the Lincoln administration, 40 acres and a mule, which after he was assassinated, that was rescinded. Now back here it says, pitched as a solution for both groups, sharecropping was presented to the former enslaved as a land ownership by proxy. It put an end to the work in gangs under an overseer while keeping black workers with the agricultural sector preferably on the same land they had been held captive, and incentivizing high crop yields, benefiting landlords. But even though the old plantation system had changed and some day-to-day activities were delegated to sharecroppers, sharecropping proved to be fundamentally unequal arrangement organized to keep black farmers from ever achieving economic or social mobility. Okay. Black Americans in the South were eager to exercise their newfound freedoms, often after the war. A historian, Wesley Allen Riddle, writes the most basic and symbolic of these freedoms was mobility itself. The former enslaved left their plantations in droves. Some looked for work in southern devastated cities, while others looked for and were given by the Union Army vacant land on which to raise a farm. But work in the cities was hard to come by. Only about 4% of freedmen were able to find work in the southern cities after the war, and many who came there were relegated to shanty towns of the former enslaved. As for those who were given vacant lands by the Army, they were forced out by President Andrew Jackson, concealed Field Order number 15 in the fall of 1865, returning these portions to their white owners. While many former enslaved did not leave the plantations after the war, many others could not. Those trying to leave forced horrific violence and intimidation by these former owners. Life as a sharecropper. By design, sharecropping deprived black farmers of economic agencies or mobility. Although they were no longer legally enslaved, sharecroppers were kept in place by debt, as their income was dependent on both the profits from the sale of the crop and with whims of the landowners. Sharecroppers had to find means to sustain themselves during the rest of the year. They were forced to purchase food, seed, and clothing and other goods on credit, typically from the plantation commissionary owned by the landlord. At the end of the harvest, when the revenue from the crop was settled up, the sharecropper's portion of the profits was calculated against their debts. As a result, sharecropping was often ended the year owing the landlord money. What could not be paid off was carried into the next year, creating a cycle of indebtedness that was often impossible to break. So, sharecropping was a way of continuing slavery, really. A small percentage of African Americans, probably 2 to 3%, would get away to the cities and try to get jobs, which were difficult to get. They would get the worst of the jobs. A few others managed to get some land and be able to work it independently. But a lot of former slaves end up working on the same plantations that they were slaved on, and in many ways became slaves again because they were constantly indebted to the landowner and couldn't get ahead. For one, the landowner controlled the narrative. He controlled where they got their product from, how it was sold. So everything was rigged for them to remain in control. Why they didn't have an overseer over them, they still had to produce. They still had to come up with it in order to survive. And in order to get the things when they weren't having crops, they had to go get it from the landowner and his so-called store. So really, it was a continuation of the old system. So as we've seen in the country, we had slavery, then we go to sharecropping, and we continue to go on throughout time with some improvements happening by resistance. The civil rights movement was a big move that pretty much crumbled sharecropping along with other technologies that would come along that made sharecropping a little more obsolete because the farmers could come along with technological equipment and things that could do the work, and so they didn't really need to have the agreements as much. Nevertheless, as time changes, there were still ways of denying people uh, their rights, about denying people education. Remember, education is one of the keys to changing one's narrative by being able to understand what the system does, what's going on. You know, a lot of people say the system is broken, but no, the system, it works really, really well. The system is meant to oppress. The system is meant to dehumanize and to degrade. We don't need to fix the system. We need to scrap it and have a new system, a system that is of equality, a system that values people for who they are. Now, as time goes on in the 20th century, we have had a repeat. Every time one thing happens, after the civil rights happened, new things came along in order to oppress people. One, we had the continual oppression. We already talked about healthcare being denied. And while the target was keeping African Americans down, many whites have also faced that. And as the greed in the healthcare system continues to rise, more and more people are being affected by this target towards African Americans. So you see, it doesn't contain just where they target. It spills over, and they don't care about that. And now, and the Trump administration today is doing the same thing, retargeting poor African American communities, which is also hurting white communities. They don't care about anything but what they want. So one thing I would like to point out that is in particular like sharecropping. So let's point out first of all, what did sharecropping do? Sharecropping, yes, provided a small income for them, the people who were participating in it, but it kept them in rundown, crummy houses that was provided by the plantation owner. It kept them indebted, so they could not really have aspirations of the future. No matter how hard they worked, they were kept down by their indebtedness to the owner. They couldn't leave, they couldn't escape because of this debt. And so when you have that debt, you have no chance of one being successful yourself or two, putting away money or real estate or things that you can pass on to the next generation so the next generation doesn't have to start from scratch. And therefore, you're making progress. I'm not talking about becoming extremely wealthy, but to be successful, perhaps in a business or just have a home without having to start all over again. Generational wealth is something that helps. It is, of course, what the white elites in this country have had. Generational wealth passed on from generation to generation. And many of those people who passed on that wealth passed it on because they were slave owners. And also, they were sharecropper owners and any other type of business that actually cheated people in order to be successful. Those companies are owned by white people who kept unions down to make as much money as possible. All those things have created generational wealth for an elite, while keeping others from having generational wealth and living paycheck to paycheck. Now, the one thing I want to compare it to is the student loan debt in this country, which we realize, as we've already talked about, if you missed the video, it's a few videos back, where President Reagan actually was the one in California to start saying that students should pay tuition. And from there, it began to spread across the country. Before that, tuition for the most part was free. Why? It's a public good. Just like public education is a public good. But Republicans today, are trying to destroy that as well. They want to transfer the money from public education to private institutes, where many times are Christian schools that are teaching a white nationalist indoctrination. Not that they don't indoctrinate in our public schools, but even more so in these white Christian schools that continue the process of racism. But along with that, because these schools do have tuitions, even if they get some public money, it denies the poor from having access to this education. And if you take money away from the public schools and make them worse, and then make it harder for access, you keep people down. By charging tuition, in our colleges and universities, we are keeping some people away from colleges and universities because of the overwhelming stress of carrying debt, the overwhelming having to fill out FAFSA forms and all these different things, which, you can get some help with that, although that's been cut down. So you see, grants and those things were the answer to help combat the tuition. But again, it shouldn't be that every single person should get access to education. Let's take even the wealthy child, the child that came from a wealthy family. But the child doesn't have a good agreement with their family. Something's wrong there. And so they want to go to school, but because their family makes too much, grant other things to help pay for the school, people, but it doesn't hurt the elite, the people who have the money to pay for it so they can remain on top. People go throughout most of their life indebted in student loan debt. Now, the Affordable Care Act had some of that stuff in there, and I don't know where it stands today with President Trump's big, beautiful bill. Big, beautiful for who? It's certainly not big and beautiful for the people down here. We get the weeds. While they are getting the beautiful part of the bill, they are making incredible amounts of money. Student debt is a way of keeping people indebted. So some of them can't afford to get homes, they can't afford to do this, and they certainly can't afford to put away generational wealth. Now, some do become successful and pay off their student loans. Okay, because they're really doing some good jobs. But even like a doctor who makes perhaps more money than they would need to, I'm not saying they shouldn't be paid well, but they could be paid a little bit less if they had no student loan debt. They'd be making good money, when they may have to pay up to $500,000 in student loans. This also discourages people from going into the field of being a doctor. But who cares? The elite are going to get seen by a doctor, right? So this stuff is ongoing. This is why we need to stand against student loans. It's another form of sharecropping. And why it does target African Americans, it spills into overall. So if you don't care about anybody else, think about your children and your future, unless you're part of the elite, which I'm sure you don't like what I'm saying in other ways either if you're watching this, And I probably won't have you as an audience member very long. That's okay. Because I'm not talking for you, I'm talking against you. Nobody needs to be billionaires. We all need to be able to live a good life. I'm not saying everybody has to make the same wage. That's not what I'm saying either. There is something to be said for effort and the way we work to things. But everybody who works a job, including McDonald's and something else, should make a living wage to be able to live. Have a minimum wage that actually meets the basic necessities of life without having to work 2 and 3 jobs. Everybody should have that. We should have a minimum wage that goes up with the cost of living. That way, the discussion is over. All right. So think about it. I want you to think about this. Sharecropping and being indebted with student loans. Things have changed, but have they? Not really. What will you do about it? And what will you politically stand for? Because think about this. You have been indoctrinated to believe certain things, like this is welfare or this is a handout. No, it is about society nurturing itself. My last point will be here. Your parents are supposed to take care of you when you are a young child. That's not a handout. That's not welfare. It's a responsibility to bring you up, to teach you morals, to guide you into understanding so you can take care of yourself, to teach you how to have relationships and whatnot, and hopefully teach you about God in a good way, not in the way that white nationalists are doing. Well, society also has a responsibility for its young people in order to nurture them, in order to carry out the function of this country or any country. Educating the public is about making the country a better place, about making us work together and be harmonious. But the powers that be don't want harmonious. They want white power and control. So they'll do anything to deny it. Stop thinking of free college or other things like this in healthcare as a handout and start thinking of it as a cooperation of when we work, we pay taxes, and we get the benefit. All of us get the benefit, not just the upper middle class or the 1%. And think about this. Many European countries do pay a little bit more in tax, but they get all these services covered. We don't pay as much in tax, but we pay for those services outside of that, and we actually pay more. We lose more of our income by the things that we have to pay for that these countries included in tax, and they have more money left over. Also, don't get stuck in the propaganda. Each European country is different, even though many of them are part of the European Union. Some have strengths in one area to another. One of the GOP's strongest attitudes is to pick out the worst thing one particular country has and to blow it up and say, this is what you get when you do it this way. And it's just not true. And many times they're looking at part facts and not other facts too. Can things be improved in other countries? Sure they can. But we have a long ways to catch up. Our system does do well as far as healthcare if you can afford it. But if you can't afford it, go off and die someplace. You're not worth saving. If you don't have the money, you're not worth saving. If you don't have the money, you can't participate in the education system and you can't participate in this economic system that we call the greatest country in the world. The United States is by far not the greatest country in the world. We may be one of the greatest military forces in the world, not the greatest, but we may be really up there. We may be power in our influence in some ways. And I believe that we have the potential to be the greatest country in the world. We have a whole lot of things to deal with. Are you going to deal with it? Will you join in this struggle? Will you go along in this journey with me? I'm doing this to talk about these things. What will you choose to do? Will you choose to do something? I hope so. Because we will be better ourselves when we worry about others as well. When we try to fight individually, we can't take care of everything we need. And if you become somebody like Donald Trump or Elon Musk, you become some very sorry and careless, uncaring, heartless people. There's no love in the men's hearts. They don't care about things. They care about manipulating and power. Is that who you want to be? Well, maybe. I hope not. because it's not a life worth living. A life worth living is one that cares about you, that works hard, does the best that you can, cares about people, family, friends, cares about people you don't even know, that their lives have a chance. Now, it's up to them many times to do certain things, but do they even have a fair shot or chance to do something? Until the next time on American Christian or Christian American.